Hello everyone, it's Denise with Black Ribbon Studio. And as you will remember, I recently dyed some cotton yarn for the very first time. And many of you asked that I show you how I did this. So I'm going to attempt to give you a quick demonstration. This is not a tutorial by any means. It's just the way that I do it. So I'm going to start by just pointing out to you the items that I'm using. I use the white cotton from a cone of sugar and cream cotton yarn. You're going to need some table salt, some dish detergent, water, and I have my pot sitting on the stove ready to go. You will of course need your RIT dye, and what I found to be the most important parts of this was the dye fixative and the salt. So I'm going to take this in parts and mush everything together, and I really hope you enjoy. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to affix the zip tie to the yarn, and I'm going to let it soak really well just in some plain water. Okay guys, so while I have the yarn soaking, I just have it soaking in a little tub of water, room temperature water. I decided to go ahead and put my water on to boil, and I'm using 16 cups of water. Now, to that water, I'm about to add what I hope is 1 cup of salt. And I say that because I used a lot of salt in my last dye attempt, and I haven't bought any salt since then, so I'm just going to use what I have. If you're curious about these measurements, I actually went on the RITdye.com site, where they give you loads and loads of information about how to use their product to dye fabric. And I'm in no way affiliated with RIT. This was simply an experiment that I wanted to do so that I could create something specific. And so that's where I got my information. Okay, so I'm going to take this salt over to my pot, dump it in, stir it around so that it can start to dissolve. And to this pot, I'm also going to add some dish detergent. And it will simply be 1 teaspoon of dish detergent. 1 teaspoon. And guys, I got almost everything that you see here at Dollar Tree. I'm not using any of these utensils with food. They are strictly for dye and mixing dye. So I'm just going to use a teaspoon of some dish detergent. Put this in my pot with my water and salt. And what I'm going to do is just let this, just bring this to a boil, to a good boil. And once this water starts to boil, I'll come back with the next steps. Okay guys, so I have, as per instructions, I brought the water up to a boil. The water contained salt and dish detergent. I now have brought it back down to a simmer as per instructions, and it's now time to go ahead and add the dye. Now, one thing I did want to mention is that this is kind of exciting for me because the color I'm going for today is Dusty Pink. And we are actually making this Dusty Pink using tangerine and cocoa brown. So it's going to be really interesting to me to see how this actually turns out. And so it's really simple, guys. I only need to use a half a teaspoon of each of these colors. So again, the RIT dye site. Okay, so as I was saying, the RIT dye site actually has all the information that you need to figure out your measurements for your formula. So I'm going to reposition the camera so you can see what's going on. Okay, so here's the pot of simmering water, and I'm going to go ahead and start to add the dye now after shaking it up. I'm having a hard time seeing the measurements on these spoons, but you know, that's just a me thing. So I'm going to first add the tangerine. I'm adding a half a teaspoon of tangerine. Into the water you go. And then I'm going to add a half a teaspoon of cocoa brown. And for those of you who've been following me for a while, you know that pink is my favorite color, so this was a really good choice to experiment with. So we can't use more pink yarn. I always can. Okay, so far so good. I'm just gonna mix this up a bit. And we can't really see what color it is from here. It looks kind of dark. But that's okay. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to wring out the yarn that I've had soaking in tap water. Just going to wring it out a bit. And here we have it with the zip tie and everything. And I'm just going to go ahead and immerse it into the dye bath. Now I believe that the last time I dyed yarn, what I did was I left the yarn in the dye bath on simmer for approximately 20 minutes. The RIT dye site does say that the first 10 minutes you want to keep your item moving for the first 10 minutes to get it fully dyed, and then I left it for an additional 10 minutes. So I'm going to do that, and then I will be back. Okay, guys, this has been simmering for 20 minutes. One thing I want to point out to you is that when you're using the RIT dye to dye the cotton yarn, it's not the same as using the acid dyes where you expect the color and the dye to exhaust from the water. That's just not going to happen with cotton. So what we are going to do right now, I'm going to go ahead and shut this off. And we're going to remove the yarn from the dye bath and just let it sit. We're just going to let it sit in this tub until it is completely cooled off before we rinse it. And that's going to be our next step. Let me see if I can find the twist tie, zip tie anywhere. Make it a little easier to pull it out. Here we go. That looks kind of dark, guys. What do you think? I'm not sure if I would call that a dusty pink. If so, it's like really, really dusty. So, anyway, as I said, I'm going to just set this aside in the basin and let it completely cool off before we try to rinse it. And I'll be back. Okay, guys, so now we're ready to go ahead and get going with the very last steps here. And I have the yarn all cooled off in this bin. And I'm just gonna, what I'm going to do is I'm just gonna squeeze out any of the excess dye. I'm gonna do that before we put it in our fixative, because we're gonna put it in the fixative before we rinse it. So what I did before was, my calculations told me that I needed to use 8 teaspoons of fixative. But, again, I encourage you to check the RIT dye site. So, I'm just going to use the bit of fixative that I have left in my bottle. Pour that in the water. Okay, so I've just added the fixative to the water. I'm going to give it a little stir. And then I'm going to go ahead and add the yarn into the water with the fixative. That's plenty of water by now. I'm just going to get it down in here good. Give it a little bit of a stir. And I tell you guys, this fixative I think makes all the difference, because my first attempt at dyeing, I did not apply the fixative properly, and the yarn really just bled a lot when I went to rinse it. So this is a big key. Also, I want to point out again and remind you that this is cotton yarn only. I would not use this method to dye any animal-based yarn such as wool. This is strictly for the cotton yarn. And we're going to let that sit for approximately 20 minutes before we start to rinse. Okay, guys, it's time for us to rinse this yarn and see what the outcome is. We shall keep in mind that the yarn is always going to look darker when it's wet. but we're not going to let that last. Although, I am feeling a little bit iffy, but the water looks clean. So maybe the yarn's going to dry quick. Here we go. And as you can see, I hope you can see this, there is not a lot of dye coming out of this yarn at all. And as I said, I feel that it's all due to the fixative. I do not think that you can successfully dye cotton yarn with the RIT dye without it. I'm going to go ahead and we're going to rinse this all out. I'm going to give it a very quick wash with some dish detergent. Rinse it some more. Hang it to dry. And I will definitely share the final. Look at that water, guys. It's clear. I will share the final results with you with the dried yarn on my very next podcast. Thank you, everyone, for joining me on this adventure. Thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it.